just needed some encouragement,
I guess.
some global encouragement.
You
We
can
sent-
always rely on Neil's big watch.
Thank you, Sven. It's good to hear you.
So, team, I'm setting up the YouTube live right now, and we will
Şey var
start
bari
in
fısfısı.
3 more minutes.
Orada var ya bir tane.
This part is not moderated. You can say hi or whatever you want. If you want to take the floor, please, you're welcome.
Good morning from Colorado.
Hello.
Okay, brethren, I just shared in all the groups and in public chat here as well the link to live if anyone wants to share it. Some brethren and not only follow YouTube live because they are at work this time, so they may enjoy the link.
Hello, everyone. Brother David, also hello to you too.
Hello, brethren. Hello, Matvinder, brother. How are you?
I'm great, great. Thank you very much.
Okay, just they call it housekeeping rules, sort of. Sometimes you may be following the lecture and you can use public chat. You can sometimes want to kind of get the question that comes to your mind in that very moment, particular moment, drop it in the public chat if you want to. I will scroll up every single time and I'll try to read them all. So if you have any questions during the presentation, do not hesitate to drop in the questions or comments. You could do it privately as well if you want. Sometimes I've been asked if they can, should wait till the end of the presentation. You can wait to get the floor, but if you have any questions meanwhile during the presentation, please use the chat. That's what it's for. So that's from me. Okay. Okay, we're live, we're recording. And I guess, Brother David Felty, how are you?
Doing okay.
Doing great, doing great. That's good. Young as always. Sipping your cup of coffee in the morning.
Not so sure about that young business.
Your dedication, your everything, how you deal with these kind of things and you share with enthusiasm, that tells me that you are young. You're young in spirit, in your heart, and that's what matters, I guess.
We don't even know whether young is good anymore because now I get this picture of the living dead. Where they say, "You're an old soul," and I always think that's not a compliment.
All right.
So it all depends on the tone of voice and so forth, whether old is young or young is old. Huh?
All right. Okay. So with that very pleasant moment, I'll take the opportunity to mute now everyone and disable your microphones to keep the recording clear. And Tim, you should have a pop-up window on your screen. There you are. Okay, as we always do, I will briefly introduce you, the topic, some rules as a reminder, and then you have uninterrupted, very interesting 1 hour, up to 1 hour, and plus or minus. Okay, so once again, Gamar Jobat, that is hello in my native Georgian, and today we are on Sapere the 205, and the topic that we'll be dealing today would be secrets of the universe, and we have utmost pleasure and honor to host again Tim White, and we'll be dealing with this very interesting topic together. So in continuation of the series of public lectures, we have the honor to host Tim White, who is an esoteric writer, broadcaster, lecturer, researcher, and organizer based in Yorkshire, England. A journalist for more than 50 years, he lectures in the UK and worldwide on occult topics and is an international speaker for the Theosophical Society. So I won't go into the describing the topic, as Tim will do it himself. You who received the invitation letter, you already have the idea of what we will be discussing. So I will skip that part, and later on I will share Tim's website for you who are interested in following up with the theosophical points of view or the work of Tim. You will be able to get the books and works that Tim does and are fascinating out there, available for anyone to get. So I will remind that Sapere Aude is public, international, neutral, apolitical, educational activity, which is not linked with any GL or organization in the world. And everyone who comes to Sapere Aude is a Sapere Audian, is a like-minded person who is trying to understand more about this ancient brotherhood, about its organizational culture, how it developed, where it is now, different national aspects, spiritual aspects, and many other things in Freemasonry or around it. So what we do is just like-minded persons getting together to learn about these kind of things, and relying on very interesting and honorable, knowledgeable speakers we have honor to host all the time. And once more, we may belong to different jurisdictions, Masonic ones. We may hold higher ranks in our jurisdictions, or we may not, of course. But if we belong and hold higher ranks, that does not mean anything here, because here we participate as individual members of our own societies, and we do not represent our organizations or any GL that we may be affiliated with. And all the opinions, comments, or questions that we make should be dealt like that, should be interpreted as ones of with individual nature, and those may not at all coincide with the official standpoints of our organizations or jurisdictions. So with the public nature of Sapere Aude, we do allow male and female, members and non-members. Everyone is welcome who wants to discuss with us, participate with us in these very interesting discussions. And thus, for those who still ask regarding the nature of the content that we record, yes, you can share it publicly to anywhere. You can invite to our YouTube channel or Facebook page, and that would be great. If you want, you can share the links wherever you want, would it be lodge or a meeting or privately to your friends who are interested in the same topics. So there is nothing that kind of impedes you to share all these recordings to anyone. So once again, we don't discuss interjurisdictional issues. We don't discuss politics and religion for political or religious purposes. That means that we don't proselyte, whatever word it is. Sorry for that. But we do go into religious or political aspects of the topic if such need is there. And now I guess I've covered all the things, and it is once again my huge pleasure, Tim, to invite you to the floor. Floor is all yours.
Thank you very much indeed, David, and welcome to everybody this afternoon. Well, at least it's afternoon where I am, but what's wonderful about these things is that we get people from all over the place. I must say I've enjoyed doing the 3 previous talks which I did for you some weeks ago, in which we discussed death and reincarnation and karma, and also the hidden dimensions of life, which I'll again be touching on this afternoon. Some of the ideas, in fact most of them, are contained in another book which is available on my website, and I've put the website address in the chat box. This is a book called Cycles of Eternity, which looks at the main esoteric and occult ideas in a very straightforward and simple way, because these things can get incredibly complicated, as you're all aware. Well, this afternoon, I guess we're dealing with a fairly big topic, the secrets of the universe, of which there are many, I suppose. I'm only privy to a very small number of them. And what I propose to do is to just spend a minute or two at the start looking at the mainstream view of the world and reality, and then seeing how this contrasts, often very starkly, with the ageless wisdom teachings, what we call esoteric or occult ideas. I'm a member of an organization called the Theosophical Society, which enshrines many of these ideas, but I also speak to many other groups of like-minded people. And I don't think organizations, I do think organizations should interact much more, because many of us share very similar ideas. And I think it's always very useful to share those ideas and look at them from each other's perspectives, because although we might use different language, although we might express them in different ways, I guess many of us have an overall view of what this is all about. So let's start with the mainstream and scientific view, which of course is the prevalent view, certainly in the Western world today. Science and technology are really a kind of new religion in many ways. People are much more devotional to what science says in some places than they are in terms of their spiritual aspirations often. But science has a number of problems insofar as it only sees things in certain perspectives. One of these is the fact that science at the moment, or certainly most scientists, only see things from a material perspective. They think only the physical plane of reality is the only one which exists. But what I hope to demonstrate, and what people have believed down the ages, people who subscribe to the ageless wisdom ideas, is that there are a number of other dimensions which exist, and we'll deal with these a little later on. But science and religion can't themselves answer many of the questions. They attempt to do this, and they do it with varying degrees of success. But the scientific point of view refuses to go into any kind of meaning of life. It doesn't actually see any meaning in life. It doesn't ask the questions, why? You know, what's the purpose of all this? It just gives us the facts, and it says that any speculation about this is really the preserve of philosophy or religion. But the scientific view which comes across to me, and which I've absorbed all my life, having studied science quite extensively, is that existence and the universe is purely random. It's an accidental event. It's purposeless, without any kind of overall plan or guiding intelligence. It refuses to look at these things. And yet the very reasons that we are here cannot be explained by science alone, although science has made enormous inroads, certainly in my lifetime. It can see stars which are hundreds of light years away. It can see far into the universe. It's devised technologies to examine the smallest parts of matter, quarks and subquarks and all these other exotic particles which they find in places like the Large Hadron Collider and other atom smashers around the world. Whether these will actually reveal some of the things that we're going to talk about this afternoon or not is another matter. I think the jury is rather out on that. So science is, to me, often quite cold and quite logical, over logical sometimes. And the problem with science is that it sometimes believes that it knows it all. Back in the Victorian era, they were saying to people, well, there's no point in studying physics or chemistry anymore. We know all there is to know. And we're just dotting the I's and crossing the T's now and filling in all the details. And then, of course, along came quantum physics 100 years or so ago, which completely changed the game and showed the universe to be a much more weird place than anyone had ever imagined. It wasn't this regular Newtonian clockwork universe, a mechanical universe, as we'd been told. It was something very different. And science is certainly going through a very, very exciting time at the moment. It's just that it is somewhat blinkered in many ways. It has something that's known as the standard model, a series of laws. And when something new comes along, which doesn't conform to these laws, it often tends to be rejected because the scientists don't want to have to rewrite the rule book. But inevitably, in the next few years and decades, this is something we'll have to do. We will have to revise what this standard model is based on new knowledge. So the universe, according to science, came into existence 14 or 15 billion years ago in something which was called the Big Bang. Interestingly enough, the phrase the Big Bang was coined by a man called Sir Fred Hoyle, who went to the same school as me, not at the same time, here in Yorkshire. And he actually coined the term the Big Bang as a criticism, as a pejorative term. And yet it's been taken on as something which is now absolutely unassailable. And that before the Big Bang, everything was a singularity, everything was compressed into something infinitesimally small, and then something or other happened, science can't tell us what, nor can religion, happened to trigger off this explosion of life. But it's interesting the fact that it doesn't choose to speculate on the whys. It just tells us the whats and the hows of this. And for this reason, I think that science sometimes comes over as being dogmatic and perhaps a little narrow-minded. I'm certainly not saying that all scientists are narrow-minded. I mean, if they were narrow-minded, people like Richard Branson and Jeff Bezos wouldn't be busy trying to fly themselves into space over the next few days. So it's made enormous accomplishments. The accomplishments have been huge. But science and technology, as we know, have also created a number of problems. And whether science, which has created those problems, can solve those problems is another of those open questions. So science, certainly in the West, is the new religion. And yet, all the time we hear scientists saying that they can't perceive most of the universe. The estimates are that something like 95% of the material in the universe, which should be there, according to their calculations, cannot be seen. So they ascribe terms like dark energy and dark matter to these things, which are somewhat loose terms, and they seem to indicate, yes, there is something there, but we don't know what it is, and we don't know how to perceive it. And this is where the ageless wisdom teachings might actually hold some answers for them if they're prepared to listen to them. So that's the scientific point of view. That's the point of view that most people subscribe to at the moment because they have great faith in science. But there's another view of ourselves and the world and the wider universe. And this is sometimes called the ageless wisdom tradition. It's enshrined in movements, perhaps like your own, perhaps like the one that I belong to, the Theosophical Society, and certainly others, the Rosicrucians and many other groups as well. Often when we use the word esoteric and occult, it conjures up all sorts of images. If you use the word occult in ordinary conversation with people, they somehow imagine it's got to do with devil worship or black magic and people with horns dancing around fires and making sacrifices, human and animal, and it's got nothing to do with that. Esoteric simply means secret, and occult simply means hidden from view. This ageless wisdom tradition was formerly, until perhaps 130, 140 years ago, the preserve of a very small number of people who had preserved these ideas down the ages. Some of these ideas are indeed very powerful and shouldn't necessarily be the domain of everyone, because inevitably human beings tend to misuse very powerful information. They tend to either commercialize it, or even more likely is that they weaponize it and use it as an ever more effective means of harming and destroying other people. So some of these ideas are extremely powerful, particularly the hidden forces and energies which are involved, and which will be the subject of my next talk in a fortnight's time. So esoteric and occult just mean that these views are much more fringe. They've been largely hidden from view. My own view on this is that they were largely brought to the attention of the West, certainly, by someone many of you will have heard of, a woman who was one of the co-founders of the Theosophical Society, Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, who was born in what's now the Ukraine in 1831, who died in 1891. She formed the Theosophical Society, and she spent her life going around the world, in the Caucasus, in the Far East, in the Near East, Africa, America, South America, gathering information from all sorts of different sources and meeting people who were clearly very advanced human beings. So the esoteric viewpoint is very different from the material perspective, or the material only perspective. And when Madame Blavatsky first outlined these ideas in books like Isis Unveiled and The Secret Doctrine, she said then she'd only lifted a tiny corner of the veil, maybe just 2, 3, 4, 5% of what was known. And it was felt that this was the maximum that human beings could absorb at the present time without it causing problems. There was some opposition from some quarters about her revealing this, and many of the people with whom she was in contact felt that she went too far in doing this, and that the world wasn't ready for these ideas. And yet she, and perhaps she is one of the chief architects of this, managed to get certain deep, timeless truths into popular consciousness almost by the back door. We now talk regularly about things like karma and reincarnation, whereas these things were more or less unknown in the West before her time. So without theosophists evangelizing about this, it somehow crept, or some of these ideas have crept into popular consciousness. And it's some of these ideas which I'm now going to explore. So in the ageless wisdom tradition, life all has a purpose. It all has a meaning. It's not random or accidental. It conforms to some kind of plan. The ageless wisdom tradition says that all life forms are here for a single purpose, which is to evolve through cyclic evolution, through progressive cycles of birth and death. And each new life can be regarded almost as a spiral. Each time we re-emerge on the physical plane, we hopefully are a little bit higher than we were last time. Obviously, in different lives, we make more progress than we might do in other ones. And it's really down to us as to how much we choose to investigate and study these things. Theosophy and the ageless wisdom tradition, and others as well, say that human beings have been on an extremely long journey. And this is something which is very hard for some people to understand, and that we have evolved through the mineral kingdom, through the plant and vegetable kingdom, through the animal kingdom, until we finally graduated to the human kingdom, where we now are. And since human life first appeared on this planet, we've been through immense amounts of evolution, because when human beings first appeared, they didn't have physical bodies as we understand them now. And by the time we reach the end of the human period and we graduate into higher realms, the superhuman realms, we will probably no longer have bodies as we have them now. They won't be as solid and physical. They will be much more ethereal. So this idea of cyclic evolution is a very, very powerful one, because if nothing else, it tells us, and I tried to talk about this in previous lectures that I gave, that we don't just have this one single life here on Earth. Because if you think about this for more than a few seconds, you realize that that would be absolutely pointless. You can't learn very much in a single life, particularly if you're destined to die at a few weeks, a few months, or only a few years old. And it's quite clear, as I've tried to explain before, that human beings do go through many, many lives in which they gradually ascend and improve themselves. We'll deal with that in a little bit more detail later on. But another very central idea of this ageless wisdom tradition of theosophy is that there is this principle known, its fancy name is hylozoism. And that simply means that there is life everywhere. Life is ubiquitous. There is nothing but life in the universe. And it also tells us, as many more people are beginning to realize now, that while everything is alive, it's also conscious, it's also evolving, and it's also intimately interconnected. Quantum physics has shown us that things can be joined together, even though they're a vast distance apart. And this is something that people are really beginning to understand on Earth now. Ever since James Lovelock came up with his Gaia theory, in which the Earth is not just a lump of dead rock floating around the sun. It's a living, breathing organism, and we are an intimate part of that organism. And this begs the question, why are we choosing to destroy the very life form which hosts us? Because clearly that has been happening for a long time. And I think the ecological movement, theosophy, and a number of other strands of human thought have massively changed people's ideas about this, certainly during my lifetime, and more importantly, in recent decades. This principle of hylozoism, of the ubiquitousness of life, tells us also that there's no such thing as empty space or dead matter. Nothing is dead. Everything is alive and conscious on its own level. This is something hard to tell ordinary people when you tell them that even rocks and members of the mineral kingdom have a kind of consciousness on their own level. It's got nothing to do with human consciousness. It's nothing like human consciousness, but it is consciousness. Because the idea is that the universe consists of this energy called consciousness, and that consciousness actually then produces the physical form. Science tells us that you can't have consciousness without some form to contain that consciousness, but the esoteric tradition takes an entirely opposite view, and it says that consciousness produces form. So here you have a real conflict and dichotomy between the mainstream scientific view and what a few people down the years, down the centuries and millennia have known. A number of these esoteric traditions also talk about the fact that there isn't just one universe, but perhaps many universes. And this idea of a multiverse is an idea which has come into popular consciousness quite a lot in recent decades, not least in the works of science fiction. A lot of people talk about these parallel realities, and this is something which is very interesting to study. Now, I said earlier on that science really is only concerned with the material plane of existence. But in other traditions, in the esoteric tradition, there are other planes of existence. The highest one is often called the divine plane. Below that is what we call the monadic plane. Below that is the spiritual plane. Then there's something called the intuitional plane, and then the mental plane, and the astral plane, and finally the physical plane. So these are very rarefied states of existence, and the top two or three we know very little about, because we don't really at the moment have the equipment, either mentally or spiritually, to understand these things. We can only understand them from the perspective where we happen to be. But this idea that there are other planes of existence also applies to ourselves as human beings, because as well as having a physical body, which we all recognize, there are other bodies as well, other vehicles. And these are called by various different things. There are numerous different names for these, and this can become slightly confusing when we try to look at different traditions and try and match up the different names. But I'll give you the ones that I'm familiar with in the hope that you also may be familiar with them and you may have an understanding of these. Animating our physical body is an energy body, a vital body. Sometimes it's called the etheric body. The etheric is a very interesting subject area, and I think this is the area where science is finally going to discover these things. The etheric is part of the physical spectrum, and it consists of 4 states of matter: above, solids, liquids, and gases. It talks about the atomic and the subatomic, the etheric and the subetheric. And these are increasingly rarefied states of matter. But without our etheric bodies, there would be nothing in which to power our physical form, because we're not just creatures of biochemical reactions. We do absorb energies from which we can't see and which we can't measure and which people don't actually recognize. But these energies, which I'll be talking about in a couple of weeks, are absolutely central to our existence. And then above that, we have something called the astral body, which is a non-physical template for everything on the physical plane. So everything that we can see around us, ourselves included, also has an astral counterpart. And it's the astral plane where we go to each night when we sleep, which we're able to access sometimes in other states, and where we go to immediately after we depart our physical bodies and we die. Above the astral body, we have what's called a mental body. And we're all familiar with this, but we don't actually consider that thoughts are things, which they are. They are forms of crystallized energy. In the Theosophical tradition and others, they normally divide the mental plane into two. One is the lower mental plane, which is the world of our everyday thoughts and mundane ideas. And, oh, is it time to go to work? What do I need to buy from the supermarket? And just these very, very ordinary things. We also have a higher mind, a higher mental faculty, which is one that can conceptualize, one which can appreciate the intangibles like truth and beauty and love. It can imagine, it can create. Above that is a principle which we call the wisdom intuition principle. Its name in theosophical circles is the Buddhic principle, taken from, obviously, Buddha. And this is a faculty which human beings are developing with some rapidity at the moment. This wisdom intuition is a higher principle than the mental principle, and it means we can absorb information without it being filtered through the prism of the mental world. It means we kind of absorb it directly. And eventually, many thousands or possibly even millions of years down the line, should we survive that long, this wisdom intuition principle will become another of our senses, along with hearing, sight, taste, touch, etc. At the moment, it's latent in many people, but I think we are seeing a generation of children coming into incarnation now who have much higher developed versions of this than certainly my generation did. And the fifth highest principle that we talk about is what we call pure spirit. And this is the contents of the universe. And we are linked to that in slightly technical ways, which I won't go into. So there's far more to us than just our bones and blood and flesh and brains and all the rest of it. And we don't need a physical brain in which to have consciousness. That might sound controversial, but it's the way that I see that it is. We don't necessarily need, as I said earlier on, to have a form, an organism, in order to be able to think and to perceive and to have consciousness. Now, these 7 principles are normally divided into 2. The lower 4, the physical body, the etheric principle, the astral, and the lower mental, form what we call the personality. The personality is what we bring into this life. It's for one life only. It's like an actor wearing a mask for one different play. And each life we have a different personality. In some I'm male, in some I'm female, in some I'm rich, in some I'm poor, in some I have vast opportunities, in others I have no opportunities at all. So this is the personality which exists for one life. but we have an enduring part of ourselves, which for the sake of argument, we'll call our souls. This is another word which people interpret very, very differently, but for the sake of argument, we'll call it the soul. And the soul is the higher mental principle, the wisdom intuition principle, and spirit. And this is what we take from life to life. Obviously, over the period of a number of incarnations, this itself evolves and gets modified by experience, often very harsh learning. And we are in a place where learning is the order of the day. This planet is not an easy place to live. Even people who lead very privileged lives are faced with enormous challenges and enormous lessons to be learned. And those of us who follow the esoteric tradition subscribe to the view that each of us comes into this life with certain things that we have to achieve, certain purposes, certain life goals, certain faults which need to be addressed. So we have a purpose or a number of purposes in each life. It's often the case that people don't know what this life purpose is. Some people never find out what it is. Some people don't find out what this principle is until the middle of their lives or even towards the end of their lives. But once we do, it's a very, very empowering idea. Another of the key theosophical principles which I find very, very attractive is that unlike many religions where there is a supreme deity, and I'm not denying the existence of any supreme deity, far from it, but theosophy and other traditions similar to it talk about we human beings not being powerless and just subject to the whims of the deity. Through our own efforts, through our own determination, we can be, if we choose to put in that effort, we can be the architects of our own destiny, and we can take increasing amounts of responsibility and control of our own lives. This, for many people, is still a very distant aspiration. But what I'm saying to you is that it is a possibility. Now, another of the interesting things about the Ageless Wisdom tradition is about the evolution of the cosmos. Because unlike science, which just talks about this big bang and everything coming into existence 14 or 15 billion years ago, Theosophy talks about basically something it calls globes and chains and rounds. And this is something that is very, very complicated. I've tried to summarize this basically in the book here. And basically what it says is that everything goes through regular cycles of activity and then rest. It's talked about previous globes on which human beings have existed, and these are called chains of planets, but only some of them are made of physical matter. Others are made of much finer matter. This is something which people study for many, many years and still don't understand it. I'm simply mentioning it to you this afternoon because it is an alternative cosmological view of how things come into existence and last for a certain period of time and then go into a kind of a shadowy, restful period, which is called in Sanskrit pralaya, this period of rest and recuperation. So we won't deal with that in any great depth. It's dealt with in a number of books and certainly in my own as well. The important thing to remember about these globes and chains and rounds, and which last for trillions and billions of years, is that everything proceeds in cycles. You know, nothing stays the same forever. The Ageless Wisdom tradition talks about everything being in this perpetual state of ferment and change, where nothing stays the same even for the tiniest fraction of a second. But all the inhabitants of the universe, everything goes through a similar cycle. Whether that cycle lasts for a fraction of a second, as some of these particles in these atom smashers do, or whether it lasts for billions or trillions or quadrillions of years, it doesn't make any difference. That cycle is still the same. Something is born into physical form. It grows to reach a state of maturity. It then starts to decline. The physical form eventually dies, and that physical form goes onto the inner planes before being recycled, being reborn, reincarnated in some other way. And this is how evolution takes place. Cycles are easy to understand. Night and day, winter and spring and summer and autumn. These are the cycles of the moon and the sun. These are very, very easy to understand. But one of the cycles which I think has a great bearing on our lives on the planet at the moment is something you've probably heard of, many of you will have heard of, called the precession of the equinoxes. And this is a vast cycle of 25,920 years, in which it takes all the constellations time to circulate. It's a complicated business. Each one of these cycles lasts for approximately 2,150 years. And each of these cycles, these periods of time, these eras, has its own unique characteristics and its own unique way of rediscovering the truths about ourselves. Now, we're coming out of a cycle which is known as the Age of Pisces, which began round about 2,000 years ago. Now, these cycles don't just suddenly end one day and another one starts the following day. There's a great crossover period lasting for hundreds of years in which the influence of the outgoing cycle starts to wane, and increasingly the energies and the influence of the incoming age start to prevail. As most of you will be aware, we're moving from this age of Pisces into the age of Aquarius, which has got completely different energies to it from the age of Pisces. The age of Pisces was about devotion. It was about a certain kind of narrow-minded idealism, whether this was to do with ideas, philosophy, religion, science, or any other human endeavor. It was all very devotional. The energies of the New Age are much more synthetic. By that I mean that various new kinds of energies and ideas will be blended together. Now, one of the things about this transition is that it's always accompanied by difficulty, by conflict, by antagonistic energies colliding with each other. And this is precisely what we're seeing in the world today, almost at every level. Apart from the COVID pandemic, even before that happened, it was quite clear that we face severe social, political, environmental, and other challenges, which are very, very difficult to deal with. We live in an increasingly globalized world where notionally we are connected to one another, but we also paradoxically live in a world of increasing divisions and disharmony. And I think that this transition from the age of Pisces into Aquarius, I think we're almost at the tipping point now. It's either now or certainly within the next few years or certainly the next few decades that we will have made the transition. But of course, those energies from the outgoing age are still present, and it takes quite a long time for them to disappear. Each of these ages has, as I say, its own characteristics because it's shaped by something that we call in Theosophy the seven rays. These are seven distinct energies which prevail, and each age has its own. The last was governed by the sixth ray of devotion. The seventh, the new one is governed by the seventh ray, which is often called the ray of ceremonial magic and order. And it's a synthesizing ray. It brings things together. So this might go some way to explain why in certain epochs in history we get more wars, we get more natural disasters, we get more famines. It certainly seems to many people at the moment, with the way the world is, that we're almost in some kind of perfect storm. But what we can say is that however bad it is, and certainly it is, and we have challenges ahead of us, nothing lasts forever. And you know, with human ingenuity and human adaptability and humans understanding more about their own physical and non-physical makeup, we can do something about these things. And these ageless ideas, I think, are of great assistance in doing that. I'm aware that the time is moving on, so let me just move on to another thing which shows this idea of cycles and evolution. In Theosophy, we talk about in the duration of human life on the world, it's divided into 7 development groups of humanity, which we call root races. Now, the word race these days has got all kinds of connotations. It simply means development groups of humanity. So throughout world history, there will be 7 of these root races. Each of these root races is subdivided into 7 sub-races. And where we are at the moment is we are in the 5th sub-race of the 5th root race. Let me just talk about what these were. The first one, where human beings appeared in some form, a form we wouldn't even recognize today, is known as the Polarian, and this happened tens of millions of years ago. It was then followed by a second race, also of largely non-physical beings, called the Hyperborean. In the third root race, which we call the Lemurian, somewhere midway in that, human beings started to acquire bodies which we would recognize today. They became much more solidified with bones and all the other things that we associate. But then human beings were much, much larger than they are today. And this is why most mythologies and most traditions talk about giants in their distant past. There's virtually no group on Earth that hasn't mentioned giants at some time.